Hello there, you're watching All 24 News World News program, and these are tonight's top stories. Dozens are killed and wounded in sweeping U.S. raids on Yemen as Washington vows further strikes. In swift retaliation, Houthi forces targeted an American warship in the Red Sea, warning of a dangerous spiral of escalation. Despite a declared truce, the Zionist occupation continues its deadly onslaught across Gaza with mounting casualties and deepening starvation. Meanwhile, mass displacement unfolds in the West Bank as thousands are driven from their homes. Also in our news, Algeria probes Paris' undervalued real estate deals, summons the French ambassador, and slams diplomatic hypocrisy and far-right policies. And later on, preparations are underway for a high-stakes summit between Presidents Putin and Trump, aiming to chart a path toward ending the war. However, Moscow views Kiev's proposed truce as an opportunity to regroup and rearm. Welcome back to the details. Leading on news tonight, at least 53 people have been killed and dozens more injured following a series of U.S. airstrikes across multiple cities in Yemen, including the capital Sana'a. Houthi-aligned media report nearly 40 strikes pounding Sana'a, Saada, and Al-Baida, with women and children tragically making up the bulk of the casualties. The bombing unfolds against the backdrop of escalating regional tensions, while Washington remains silent on the mounting civilian cost. And in a further development to that story, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has vowed to sustain the strikes against Yemen's Houthi group until, in his words, their military capabilities are entirely dismantled. He issued a stern warning: Washington will brook no missile threats against the U.S. Navy or commercial shipping in the Red Sea. However, he was quick to clarify, for now, ground operations in Yemen remain off the table. Similarly, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reaffirmed that Washington will press on with what he described relentless strikes against the Houthis until all attacks on U.S. assets and global maritime routes come to a halt. In a swift response, Houthi forces claimed they had targeted the USS Harry Truman and its escort vessels in the Red Sea, in retaliation for overnight U.S. air raids, vowing they stand ready for further escalation.
The American enemy launched a blatant aggression against our country in the past hours, with more than 47 airstrikes targeting several areas in the governorates of Sana'a, Saada, Al-Baida, Hajja, Damar, Marib, and Al-Jawf, in which the American enemy committed a number of massacres, resulting in the martyrdom and injury of dozens.
In a related note, Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander, Major General Hossein Salami, maintained that Tehran does not seek war, but will respond with resolve to any provocation. Addressing the U.S. strikes on the Houthis, he issued a pointed warning: any genuine threat to Iran will be met with a swift and devastating response. At the same time, he firmly denied any Iranian involvement in the Houthis' military operations. Diplomatic calls for restraint are also gaining traction elsewhere. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has urged his U.S. counterpart, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to halt military operations against the Houthis without delay. In a Sunday phone call, Lavrov underscored the urgent need for a ceasefire and called on all parties to embrace political dialogue to avert further bloodshed, according to reports by Reuters. Shifting focus now to the occupied Palestinian territories. 5 Palestinians, including a child, have been killed and 10 others wounded as Zionist shelling struck multiple areas across Gaza Strip. In Jahardik, 3 were killed in drone attacks, while in Beit Lahia a child was killed and a woman injured. The death toll from a separate airstrike on a charity vehicle in Beit Lahia has now risen to 10 after one of the wounded succumbed to his injuries. Over the past 24 hours alone, Gaza's health ministry has reported 14 martyrs and 51 injured. Since October 7th, the relentless Zionist assault has claimed 48,572 lives and left more than 112,000 wounded, with many still buried beneath the rubble. For its part, Gaza's government media office has issued a stark warning. Famine is looming, with 80% of the population now facing acute food shortages after 15 consecutive days of blocked humanitarian aid. Essential supplies have all but vanished as mediators are being urged to act swiftly to halt the unfolding genocide. Meanwhile, the United Nations World Food Programme is pressing to reopen border crossings, reporting a staggering 200% surge in food prices since March and calling for immediate global intervention. And yet, despite hunger and unrelenting hardship, the spirit of Gaza endures. During the holy month of Ramadan, hundreds of Palestinians in Beit Lahia gathered amid the rubble of their destroyed homes to share a communal iftar, a powerful act of defiance against the Zionist occupation's attempt to uproot them from the land. Salman Nassib brings us the full story.
Amid the rubble of Beit Lahia, where the neighborhood's old mosque once stood tall, its blue sky dome shattered, its minaret reduced to rubble after relentless Zionist airstrikes, a powerful scene unfolds. A mega iftar is taking place, the third of its kind since the start of this blessed month. Children and elders sit side by side, breaking bread in the heart of destruction. A striking testament that even in devastation, the spirit of solidarity and resilience still burns bright.
Today marks our third collective iftar this Ramadan. Last year, war deprived us of this moment, but this year we are here to send a message loud and clear to those plotting to uproot us. We will never leave. This land is our home.
This gathering isn't just about sharing a meal. It's a message, a symbol of defiance, of unity, of belonging. A people who, after 15 months of war, famine and forced displacement, still choose life, still hold the line, still refuse to surrender.
We gather under the slogan, Life on this land worth living. On behalf of the youth and residents of Beit Lahia, we stand united in rejecting any attempt to displace us. No force on earth can push us off this land.
But even under what's being called a ceasefire, the bloodshed continues. Palestinian martyrs fall by the day, gunned down by Zionist bullets. Women, children, no one is spared.
Even under ceasefire, the occupation continues to fire. Today alone, 10 martyrs lost their lives. We call on the international community and human rights bodies to intervene immediately. The crossings must reopen. Our people are in desperate need of food and aid.
And the horrors go on. On Saturday, a deadly airstrike struck a vehicle in Beit Lahia, killing a dozen of Palestinians. They were on a humanitarian mission accompanied by media crews when the strike hit. A chilling reminder that even aid workers and truth tellers are now targets. This is no longer just a war on land. It's a war on survival, a war on hope, a war on humanity. Yet still, Gaza stands. Still, Gaza resists.
In the occupied West Bank, the Zionist forces have shot and killed a Palestinian man identified as Maher Sarsour near the separation wall in Aram, north of occupied Al-Quds. Another was wounded at the Al-Qalandiya checkpoint. Meanwhile, violence continues to escalate in Tulkarm. Homes were torched in the Nur Shams camp, Nur Shams refugee camp, forcing families to flee. In Jenin, occupation forces detonated residential buildings, displacing more than 20,000 people. Still with Palestine-related news, UNRWA has reported that more than 35,000 Palestinians have been displaced from the North Shams, Tulkarm and Jenin refugee camps amid ongoing Zionist assaults in the northern West Bank. The agency also confirmed that no humanitarian aid has entered the Gaza Strip since March 2nd, as the Zionist entity continues to impose a blockade on all crossings. Now to economic developments. Algeria has retained its position as the second largest pipeline gas exporter to Europe, once again surpassing Russia for the second consecutive month. According to the energy platform Taka, Norway continues to lead, accounting for over 57% of the EU's pipeline imports, followed by Algeria and Russia. In February, Algeria's gas exports to the European Union rose by 1.9% compared to January, reaching 92.6 million cubic meters per day, with more than 76% flowing to Italy and nearly a third of total exports delivered to Spain. Still with Algeria-related developments, Algiers has summoned the French ambassador Stéphane Romaté over properties occupied by France on the Algerian soil. According to the official news agency, the foreign minister raised concerns regarding real estate placed at France's disposal, an issue long overlooked by Paris, underscoring what Algeria describes as an imbalanced relationship between the two nations. Algeria has firmly dismissed claims by the French far right that it benefits from the so-called French aid or violates bilateral agreements. In an article titled "Diplomatic Hypocrisy when France accuses Algeria and forgets its privileges," the Algerian news agency criticized French Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau for advancing what it described as misleading rhetoric, underscoring that in reality France remains the principal beneficiary of the bilateral relationship. Algeria has condemned what it describes as France's glaring contradictions, denouncing bilateral agreements while simultaneously benefiting from them, calling it a clear case of diplomatic hypocrisy. Algiers linked this stance to a broader media campaign spearheaded by the French far right, accused of relentlessly stirring fresh controversies. Yasin Rukti reports now.
For Paris to accuse Algeria of breaching agreements while benefiting from them is a textbook case of double standards. And if the allegations themselves are built on shaky ground and political bad faith, the story becomes clearer: another manufactured pretext in a tired narrative shaped and stirred by the French far right. The same far right that's always hunting for a new issue to stir controversy. This time it's claiming that Algeria receives unjustified French aid and fails to respect bilateral agreements.
The French far right, constantly searching for a scapegoat, has found a new issue, accusing Algeria of allegedly benefiting from the French aid and not respecting signed agreements.
One of the loudest voices echoing this discourse is Bruno Retailleau, a key figure in the movement, pushing what Algeria calls a false and unreasonable narrative, ignoring a key truth: if anyone is truly benefiting from the relationship, it's France.
If there is a country that truly benefits from bilateral relations, it is undoubtedly France.
At the heart of Algeria's frustration lies a broader issue, what it describes as Paris' blatant contradictions. While it complains about agreements, it conveniently overlooks its own privileges, starting with real estate.
61 Algerian properties occupied by French authorities. French embassy in Algiers, 14 hectares, rent, symbolic and far below market value.
Algiers is now calling for this file to be reopened, demanding transparency and fairness, because while Paris complains, it's sitting comfortably in prime Algerian land, paying less than the cost of a Parisian studio apartment.
Many bilateral agreements allow France to benefit from significant advantages in Algeria. The 1968 agreement is a prime example.
And that 1968 agreement, meant to regulate the status of Algerians in France, is regularly criticized by French officials, even though France has reaped its rewards, especially through Algerian labor, which has contributed heavily to rebuilding post-war France and boosting its economy. But this, Algerian officials say, is just the tip of the iceberg. The hypocrisy is deep-rooted, and Algeria believes it's time to set the record straight and to call out those who have crossed the line of diplomatic decency.
Even experts are weighing in on the growing diplomatic divide. French historian and researcher Benjamin Stora has pointed to a growing divide within President Macron's government over its approach to Algeria. In an interview with Al Khabar, Stora noted the Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau adopts a hardline stance, while the Foreign Minister leans toward dialogue, a position, he says, is more in line with President Macron's broader vision. Turning now to Libya, where Presidential Council head Mohammed Al-Manfi has underscored the urgent need to preserve national stability and unify security and military institutions under civilian authority. Speaking during Ramadan iftar gathering with ministers and dignitaries, Al-Manfi highlighted the pressing challenges facing the country, warning of their profound implications for Libya's future.
Overcoming these challenges requires sincere commitment and strong cooperation with the international community and international organizations. We believe the close coordination with the United Nations, its agencies and friendly nations is a fundamental pillar in the implementation of Security Council resolutions.
Morocco continues to bar human rights activists, UN observers and international delegations from entering occupied Sahrawi cities, a move widely seen as an attempt to conceal ongoing abuses against the Sahrawi people. Rights organizations have repeatedly condemned these restrictions, urging greater transparency and unfettered access to the region.
Yesterday, Saturday, the Moroccan occupation authorities prevented a delegation from the International Association of Jurists for Western Sahara from entering the occupied city of Laayoune. The delegation intended to closely assess the human rights situation in the occupied Sahrawi territories. Once again, the Moroccan regime reveals its fear of the world learning about the crimes of its illegal occupation of Western Sahara.
Moving on to Ukraine now. The Kremlin has brushed aside European calls for a truce in Ukraine, dismissing them as the unveiled attempt to give Kiev time to regroup and rearm. A senior aide to President Putin accused European leaders of adopting a contradictory stance, pushing for a ceasefire while simultaneously bolstering Ukraine with continued arms supplies. On the diplomatic front, the Kremlin says preparations are underway for a summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump, with efforts focused on convening the meeting as soon as possible. While no data has been set for a direct call between the two leaders, officials suggest it could take place soon. In the meantime, Moscow and Washington remain in contact across various channels, though not yet at the presidential level.
Well, I don't want to say it, but we are dealing with him, and I think it's going reasonably well. It's a very complex situation. You know, it's a bloody, terrible war, and I do think it's going well. As you know, we have a ceasefire agreement with the Ukrainian group, and we are trying to get that with Russia too. And I think thus far it's gone okay. We'll know a little bit more on Monday, and that'll be hopefully good.
Meanwhile, Finnish President Alexander Stubb has urged greater pressure on President Putin, calling for tougher sanctions on Russia and stepped up military support for Ukraine. Speaking after a virtual summit of Ukraine's allies, Stubb maintained that force remains the only language Moscow understands, even as he acknowledged what he described as President Trump's serious efforts to pursue peace. And behind the scenes, high-level talks continued or continue between Washington and Moscow. The U.S. State Department has confirmed that Secretary of State Marco Rubio held talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Saturday. In a statement Sunday, spokeswoman Tammy Bruce said the two sides discussed the next steps toward ending the war in Ukraine and agreed to continue efforts to restore direct communication between Washington and Moscow. In Sudan, army sources say government forces have seized control of key neighborhoods in central Khartoum and, for the first time, launched drone strikes on the presidential palace. The military now claims to hold ground once dominated by the Rapid Support Forces, is steadily advancing toward the palace. Meanwhile, RSF commander Hamdan Dagalo, widely known as Hemeti, has vowed neither to surrender nor withdraw from the capital, warning of a looming escalation in the battle for Khartoum.
The war is now inside Khartoum. For 2 years, the battle has raged within the Republican Palace. Do not think for a moment that we will retreat. We will not abandon Al-Maqrin. We will not surrender Khartoum. We have told you a couple of days, there is a cure for every disease. You fight, and we fight. But by the will of Allah, you will not prevail.
Let's now take a look at other international stories making headlines around the world in the News in Brief with Sufyan Kanturi.
The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that it had taken control of a new town in the Ukrainian province of Sumy. The Russian defense confirmed that its ground forces successfully captured the town of Snovsk in the Sumy province, in addition to 30 towns in the Kursk region during this week. The Parliament of Democratic Republic of Congo called for national unity to address challenges and improve security in the East. In a speech on Saturday, Parliament President Vital Kamerhe urged President Felix Tshisekedi to remain resolute in achieving peace, stating that victory will ultimately belong to the country, regardless of how long the war lasts. In Pakistan, separatist militants drove a vehicle loaded with explosives into parliamentary convoy, killing at least 5 people in the southwest of the country. Cuba has once again plunged into darkness. The people of Havana did their best to carry on with their daily lives after another power outage. Business owners restored the gasoline generators to keep goods like meat and cheese cool. Meanwhile, some government buildings set up power strips on the sidewalks so people could charge their phones and flashlights.
Finally, let's turn briefly to the occupied West Bank, where in the city of Nablus, the spirit of Ramadan bears a different tone this year. Once aglow with festive lights and vibrant markets, the city now feels hushed and heavy, its streets echoing the weight of economic hardship and quiet resilience. Zara Farjani brings us the story.
In Nablus, in the occupied West Bank, residents are observing a Ramadan that feels quieter than usual. But beneath the surface, this apparent calm masks a much heavier reality. For many, this is a Ramadan of paradox, a month with fewer visible confrontations, yet under constant pressure, as the Zionist occupation forces continue their military campaign across the Palestinian territories.
Before
October 7th, business was booming. During Ramadan, we were busy from the first day to the last. But after October 7th, everything changed. This year, the Ramadan period has been completely different and sales have dropped significantly.
Once, the nights of Ramadan in Nablus were alive with color. Streets and neighborhoods lit up with festive lights. Families gathered and the markets buzzed with energy. But this year, this vibrancy is missing. Merchants and residents say it's a Ramadan unlike any other, overshadowed by a genocide that has raged on for more than 15 months.
In the past, people used to decorate and put up lights, but with the war and the Zionist army raids, no one even thought about putting up decorations this year.
And behind this silence lies another painful truth: economic hardship. The situation in Nablus is deteriorating rapidly. Once thriving businesses are suffering and consumer activity has hit rock bottom. The city is struggling under deepening financial strain as political instability and insecurity push families to the edge.
Back then, the market was packed with people and families. It was a time when families came together and the economy picked up. But this year's Ramadan has been really difficult. Before the war, we used to have sales, competitions and Islamic celebrations during the holy month, but none of that is happening this year.
So while the violence may be less visible in Nablus, this Ramadan, the pain remains palpable. A quieter month, yes, but one that carries the weight of grief, loss and uncertainty. And yet, even in this subdued atmosphere, the spirit of hope endures as Palestinians continue to stand firm in the face of occupation.
That's the end of our news program for tonight. Thanks for watching. Good night.